Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Leadership Adventure. Today, I'm with Jillian Climie. Jillian is using her skills to help close the gender gap. She's the co-founder of The Thoughtful Co. Welcome, Jillian.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
I'm really looking forward to hearing some of your insights because as an executive coach, I've seen some of my clients step into new roles. Some of them have been male clients, only to find that, for example, female engineers are making less than their male counterparts. And then they've had to do a whole rehaul of the compensation in that organization to bring equity to those companies. So I was looking forward to talking to you because I think that it's so important for women to have this awareness and to be able to better negotiate their pay, to feel confident about that. And I was curious, to hear a little bit about your own career path and what made you decide to get into executive compensation in the first place.
Yeah, that's a great question. It is a very niche field. Like a lot of people don't even really know what it is. But I was in business school and was really interested in both HR and finance. And I found that executive compensation is kind of a mix of both of those things. A lot of the work is a little bit more financial. So designing equity compensation programs like stock option programs to incentivize executives, or looking at market data and evaluating positioning of salary and bonus structures and things like that. So that's a little bit more of the financial side. But then it's really how do you motivate, retain, and recruit executives as well. So I liked that it was a mix of both of, not just the numbers part, but also what do we do with the numbers? How do we actually make them work for us and retain these people from other companies? So that's kind of how I got into it and started at a great consulting firm in Toronto where all of our clients were board of directors. So got to pretty early on in my career work with quite senior level boards, which was amazing. Of course, I wasn't speaking; I was, jotting notes down. But was great exposure earlier on in my career to boardrooms in Canada, which was nice.
Wonderful. And so you were working initially in the retail sector.
Yeah, so I started in consulting and then I went into retail after that. So I worked at Aritzia and then moved to Lululemon, where I led the global equity and executive compensation teams there, both in Vancouver. And really exciting sector to be in, fast growth, product changes every quarter. So there's a lot going on and a lot to learn, which was fun.
Amazing. And so what did you find were the biggest challenges for you in that role? And what was the most interesting for you while you were inside of organizations?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't actually think I've been asked that before. I think, like any organization, it's trying to figure out how to attract and retain the best talent with managing budgets as well. And how do we design programs that incentivize people towards what we want them to be incentivized by? And sometimes when we think about things like bonus structure, it seems really simple. But what are we really hoping to drive? Is it revenue? Is it profitability? Is it leadership skills? And how do we weigh those different components? And if we focus too much on revenue, are we not looking at expense management? So it's really strategic, and it gets into, as a company, where are we moving towards and how can we make sure our compensation structures support that? So challenging, but also really interesting. I loved that part of the work. And I think why I ultimately kind of wanted to leave doing that in-house and in consulting and instead support individuals is I did want to, use my skill set for something that I was a little bit more passionate about. I did find, I would see a lot of executives coming into companies who were women and they weren't always negotiating or maybe leaving money on the table and didn't know certain things that you can just negotiate for, like sign-on bonuses or equity compensation structures. And I really kind of wanted to use that skill set that I had to support individual women, which was how I ultimately ended up leaving Lululemon and starting the Thoughtful Co with my co-founder.
And so how often did you see women not asking for more, not negotiating at all when you were in that situation?
I would say a lot. And it's anecdotal for sure. I just worked at a few different companies and definitely saw just differences also in what was being negotiated, things like severance or stock options, pieces like that. Sometimes it was more those complex items that women weren't negotiating for. And I wondered, was it almost like a knowledge gap? Like, someone has told this person to negotiate for something and this other person just doesn't know that they can negotiate for that. So that was another impetus for me starting the Thoughtful Co, is just filling that knowledge gap. Like, hey, these are all the different things that you can think about negotiating. Yes, let's look at salary and title, but let's look at, severance, allowances, parental leave structure, long-term savings programs, role scope, responsibilities, equity. There's so many pieces, sign-on awards, one-time equity grants, that can go into a new package. So I really wanted to fill that knowledge gap. I felt like that was maybe a reason why people weren't negotiating as much.
Yeah, and I would agree with you there. I think that there is definitely a gap there in awareness and a bit of a blind spot, because when I started coaching some of my male executive clients, this is when I started to learn about these things myself. I had no idea about any of this before. So I do think that it's so important for women just to be aware of what can be negotiated. So thank you for doing what you're doing. I think it's so important.
Thanks.
And I'm sure that you have helped so many people. So can you share a bit more around negotiation and how women should approach that? What would be your, key advice?
There is research out there that shows that women actually are negotiating, but that it's often not as received as well when men negotiate. And I think it comes down to some of the biases that we face in the workplace. And one I talk about a lot is the likability bias, where on one hand, women are expected to be nice and agreeable. That's how society expects us to be. So when we negotiate, it can feel like we're kind of going against that. But on the other hand, we're also expected to be assertive, to be seen as a leader within an organization. And so we're constantly balancing these conflicting demands of being nice and agreeable, but assertive at the same time. And I think when we're negotiating, that can get really tough. Like, which way do you lean and how do you manage that delicate balance that we kind of have to dance? And when we structure working with our clients, regardless of level, actually, we really like to think about positioning the conversation in a positive way. So often negotiation is actually coming from a positive place, right? You love this company, you want to join, or you want to grow to the next level, you want to stay there long term. Why not kick off with that, right? You can say, I love working here. I can really see myself growing with this team over the long term. Because of that, I wanted to be open with you about where I'm at from a compensation perspective. So really framing it positively. And I find that right away can just set the stage for a more respectful conversation. And then when you're thinking about building your rationale for why you're asking for what you're asking for, really honing in on your key strengths and the value that you add to that organization. And I think that's especially important for women. We have to demonstrate the value in the things that we're doing, because we do face that bias in the workplace. And when we position our negotiation against all that incredible impact that we've had, it really helps to support our case and defend why we're asking for what we're asking for.
And so when you're talking about value, is it just focusing on value that you have demonstrated until now, or is it more looking also at the value that you can add to their organization to really come with ideas?
Yeah, great question. I think it really is both. So if you've already been in the organization, talking about maybe what you've done since you've been there, linking to key impact metrics, right? If you're at a more senior level, can you link to impact metrics like revenue, profitability, growth? If you're at a more junior level, can you link to things like efficiencies, time savings, number of projects, and then also future value, right? What you can create with that organization over the long term as well. And I think it's really important because sometimes people focus too much on market data, in my opinion, and they bring in, really solid market data that they think is great, but the organization has a completely different compensation philosophy and doesn't look at data the same way that they have. and then it ends up being a no because the data isn't agreed upon. So I like to really focus on the impact and the value drivers of yourself instead, because those are facts, right? They're what you've done or what you're doing, instead of external pieces like market data.
Mm-hmm. And so how do you feel people should value themselves in terms of, a salary? Because if it's not on market data, should it be on a previous role? Or, how do we decide on that number on what we should be asking for in terms of salary?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think in BC, it's great because we do have BC pay transparency laws now, where any new job posting technically needs to be included with a salary range, which is nice. So we have an idea of what we should be making. If you're already in an organization, you already have your salary now. So you have that as kind of a gut check, and definitely can leverage market data if you're able to find some good data. There's a couple sources out there. We also support at the Thoughtful Co. We have a market database of hundreds of clients across North America, so can help you choose that number. But when you're going into that negotiation, I wouldn't just have the only rationale be that market data. It can be helpful to help you choose that number, though. But yeah, would definitely leverage LinkedIn. Indeed, there's a lot of great salary ranges on there now. And then also talking to other people in your network too. Like sometimes the best way to get real-time market data is chatting with others who are doing similar things. And I know in Canada and the US, it's such a taboo topic to talk about compensation, but I do really believe the more we talk about it, the better it'll support each other in achieving pay equity, right? Because we'll understand when we're underpaid as well.
Yeah, I agree. And, I always have that conversation with my clients as well. And that way I also know if they're in the ballpark or if they're being underpaid, I can tell them. Also wanted to just mention that you really helped me when I was considering startup options and working for equity as well, because that wasn't a situation I had been in before. And I think that when we are in a very new situation, it's so important to be aware of what we're getting into, because it can take a lot of time. For a job offer, for example, would you be helping them with their conversations or how they demonstrate value as well with that angle?
Yeah, so what we do for new job offers is we have what we call a new offer checklist, where we go through their full current compensation package right now. We have 30 different items that we look at, from salary to severance to equity. And then we compare the new offer against that, and we pull in some market data and see where you might be low and what you might want to push on. And sometimes that's salary, sometimes it's bonus, but sometimes it's number of days of vacation or PTO or sabbaticals or professional development. So we'll kind of look at the full compensation package holistically, help you decide what you want to push on. And then we'll actually help you script the ask, which sounds kind of funny, but we do build out negotiation scripts with our clients just so they can kind of figure out how they want to frame that negotiation, what they want their rationale to be. And we scenario test it too. So it's kind of both the data lens where we help you pick the numbers, and then also helping you prepare for that conversation as well.
That's great. And do you do any practice in the conversations as well?
I love to. We always ask clients if they want to. Some want to, some don't. So we always go with their preference. But I think it is really helpful to do some scenario testing and also talk through, what the no's might be, right? They might say we don't have budget, or maybe we'll look at this in 6 months, or, all those types of things. So scenario testing for those different situations can be really helpful to prepare you real time.
Yeah. I agree. And, one of the things I find is that nobody really loves to do that. And at the same time, they know that it's really valuable, right? Because for any challenging conversation, it helps to really be able to say it out loud and to gain confidence, sometimes with these new skills, right? Because this is really a new skill for a lot of people, to be able to negotiate and to ask for what they believe that they're worth. Sometimes the imposter syndrome can come up as well. Have you found that quite often?
Definitely. I think that's been an interesting part of our kind of compensation negotiation coaching, is we so often hear the same things, regardless if I'm helping a senior executive or a new university grad. And it's, I just felt lucky to get the offer, or I wanted to prove myself first, or I felt lucky to be there. And it's almost crazy now how often I hear these same things from different industries, the US, UK, Canada levels. Like it's something around globally how women are socialized, I think, or how we especially in male dominated industries, feel like we belong or not. So I think that's a really interesting piece to kind of push against within compensation negotiations. If you've gotten the offer, you beat out, hundreds of candidates, probably you've been through multiple rounds of interviews. You've demonstrated your expertise, you have the skill set, they've checked references. It really is the perfect time to be negotiating. So I definitely try to push against that, but I think imposter syndrome is something that comes up a lot.
Yeah, I was recently having a conversation with Cheryl, a VP of Talent Development, and she said when she gets imposter syndrome, it's quite common for her. She identified imposter syndrome as the elephant in a pink tutu in her ear that comes up and whispers these things. So she found it really helpful to name imposter syndrome, and she named her Beatrice. So that way she has an image of her when she comes up as her inner critic. And but she doesn't let her lead, so to speak. She just acknowledges her. And, I was curious as well, like what your own journey has been through this. How long ago did you start doing this work and consulting when you started the Thoughtful Co?
Yeah, we started the Thoughtful Co, I think like 3.5 years ago now, which is crazy. Maybe even more. No, I think it's been about 3.5 years, which is crazy. It kind of feels like I just started it, but then it also feels like I've always been doing it. So my co-founder and I, we kind of have 3 core parts of our business. So the first part is compensation negotiation and rate setting, which we've talked about today. So that's all one-on-one support with women in negotiating, setting their rates, and advocating for themselves at work. So that's all one-on-one coaching. And then we have the consulting side of our business. So we work with employers in building more inclusive workplaces for women, specializing in engineering and construction and other male-dominated industries. And then the third part of what we do is workshops. So that kind of covers both of those topics, but compensation negotiation workshops and gender equity workshops, things like that, where we'll do for universities. We've done them from Oxford to Nokia, so quite globally. And we've really found having those 3 different service offerings has been great, because sometimes, earlier this year, the economy is pretty crazy right now. Consulting was a little bit more, people were just pausing in making decisions. And we had those other 2 revenue streams that were going really strong. So we found kind of that diversification has been great. We never know which one's going to be busy or not. And sometimes all 3 are busy, and that's great. And we've now hired some fantastic contractors to support us as well. But that's been something that we didn't really intend to do at the start, especially the workshops. We kept getting asked to speak, and we've built out that arm into kind of a revenue stream now. But that's something that I definitely recommend for any entrepreneur, making sure you obviously want to focus on your mission, and everything that you're doing is supporting that mission. But if there are different streams that have different impacts from when the economy goes crazy or in different industries, that's been really helpful for us.
Wonderful. Yeah, I can imagine, the workshops that you're offering are going to be in high demand, and especially with a lot of people now, looking for opportunities. Are you running any workshops in the next little while that are online or in person?
So we actually run all our workshops through other organizations. So we don't host any our own. We get brought in by a company or a university or a women's organization to host them. So we just had March was International Women's Day and Women's History Month. So we just did a bunch with different organizations kind of across the globe, actually, which was fun. And then we have some different ones coming up as well. So for example, I'm in Calgary with a women's organization there, and then doing one with an engineering firm in Victoria. So nice to get a bit of travel and work with different types of clients too, which is really fun.
And is it something that you see is possible to do online?
Yeah, so we offer our workshops both virtually and in person, and definitely try to structure it a little bit differently when it's virtual. We try to still make it really interactive, have people, engaged and sharing, because I know virtual can sometimes be a little bit boring. And then in person, we try to do roundtable discussions and keep people, contributing. And sometimes my favorite parts of these workshops, especially our compensation negotiation ones, are where at the end we'll do Q&A and kind of sharing, and women are sharing their stories about negotiation or things that they've been through, and so many people in the room realize they've also been through those same situations. So I love that time, and we always try to include that, and sometimes I think it's the most impactful part as well.
Yeah, awesome. I just, when I talk to you, I just think like everybody needs to have access to one of your workshops to make sure that they don't undervalue themselves, and to, really hone these skills, because it's so important. And I think that, just that awareness helps, right? But having someone guide you along the way, side by side, is so helpful, because we can question ourselves sometimes to death. So I think that just connecting and building community and being able to share more is so important. So that's one of the things that I've been working on at the moment, is to provide those opportunities to more women to be able to share with each other and have closer connections. I know some of my clients said that they only know themselves, or maybe one other female executive in their network. So these communities that bring female executives together are so important. And also, of course, to have male allies and as well to talk to.
Totally. Yeah, I think it is so underrated. And I always say, like, it's so lonely at the top. And I think you don't realize that until you get there, regardless of gender, right? It can be quite isolating. And then I think, especially for women, when you are, one of maybe none or just a very few number of women at those senior leadership levels, it can be tough. So I think that community is so important, even to just have people to vent to, and especially in times like this where the economy is crazy and so much is going on, there's so much uncertainty. Understanding what others are doing and how they're operating can be so helpful.
Yeah. One of the questions that I've had, and I thought it would be interesting to have your take on this, is what to do in this current type of market where it is a lot more uncertain. So when people are applying, they're, perhaps used to making a certain amount, but now there's so much flux. And I've seen this in HR roles as well, where they're tempted to take lower paying roles. What are your thoughts about that? Is that wise, or is it better to try and find something that's equivalent to what they're used to making? Because I know we can get used to making a certain salary, and then it's hard to accept something that's at a lower level.
Yeah. And I do think, in most cases, if you are making a move, in most cases, you do want to make more compensation for it. And that's not in all cases. Sometimes you want to leave a toxic environment, or you want to do something different, or you want to have more work-life balance, or whatever it might be. So I think thinking about those things holistically as well, right? Like, what do you really want out of this next role that you're going into, and what are your non-negotiables, and kind of setting those with yourself in advance. And sometimes that's a salary number, which I always recommend having a non-negotiable there. At least some limit, but sometimes it's also number of hours being worked, or share ownership, or flexible work schedules, and things like that. And those can equate to dollars in my mind, right? So there are situations where I think it's okay to take a bit less if other things are outweighing it. But I do think as women, we do tend to undervalue ourselves. So I do want to push against that a little bit too, and really know the value that you're adding to organizations. But it is a crazy economy right now. We're seeing lower compensation packages than I was seeing a few years ago, and not across the board, but with some layoffs, some reductions in budgets and things like that. So if you're going through a new offer process, I always recommend, trying to get them to give you a number first from a salary perspective, just so you have an idea of what their budget is. And then you can kind of make a decision based off that, and think about things like bonus structure or share ownership. Like, are there other pieces that could get you to a similar compensation level and that you could push on there so you feel good? So I don't know if that completely answers your question, but I think I am seeing some folks take slightly less for other reasons. But that being said, I think it is important to negotiate and try to hold to that value, and yeah, because we deserve it. So
yeah. Yeah, and I think it so much depends on the bigger picture, right? In terms of the cushion that someone has saved, how much leeway they have, how much debt, because that really affects the situation and their fear and level of uncertainty, right? So I think that's another important thing to be thinking about.
But yeah, I think it's interesting just to think about, compensation almost from a wealth perspective, right? Like, it's you building wealth over the long term. And there's a stat I always like to share. A difference of $1,000 in your starting salary can mean a cumulative loss of over $500,000 in your full career. And that is a bit of an older stat. It's probably even higher now. And of course, industry dependent. That's just an average. But just negotiating for a little bit more, especially when you're earlier in your career, can have such a knock-on impact. And we often think about expense management. How can we reduce expenses and all these types of things? We don't think about increasing our earnings, right? Even negotiating for a couple $1,000s more this year, each year you'll get a higher percentage increase. Maybe your bonus is based off that as well. So it's another one just to think about, especially when it's a tougher economy too. It doesn't have to be getting like a huge amount more. Just a little bit more can have a big impact.
Yeah. So, just a couple other quick questions. Just thinking about when the best time to negotiate it. Is it when you're accepting the role, or is it 6 months from now? Because I know sometimes people are promised that in 6 months they're going to get a review, or in a year. What do you think about that? I feel like the power comes at the beginning before you accept the role. But
Totally
I'm curious
agree.
to hear your thoughts.
I hate that thing. Like, oh, well, look at this. Once you're enrolled in 6 months, it's like, no, like, I don't know. Maybe sometimes that happens, but I definitely think it's when you're accepting the role. Like, it's a time where it's not expected to negotiate, but it's not, it's not going to seem odd if you're asking for more. And yes, it could still be a no, and you can still sign the offer, right? Like, you can still move on from that point. Oftentimes, you're also negotiating with HR or a recruiter, which is a very, non-emotional situation, right? Like, they do this all day. They just want you in the role for the budget they have. So once you're in the company, sometimes you'll have to be negotiating with a leader, which can be a little bit more nuanced. And I definitely would say try to get that on the offer process. It's always worth it, in my view, to ask the question and see if there's movement.
Awesome. And so is there any last final tip that you'd like to leave everyone with?
That's a great question. I would say, I think I like to leave with the research that women do expect and ask for less than men do. That is based on research. And there's also new research that just came out in the past couple of weeks, or at least I just read it in the past couple of weeks, maybe it's the past month, that shows there actually is an offer gap. So women are offered about 5% less than men as well. So it's not just about negotiating. We're actually being offered that lower starting point. And I think sometimes when we hear those stats, like, we do ask for less, we expect less, and we're offered less, it's nice motivation to negotiate. And negotiation is so normal. It happens all the time. I can attest to it. I've spent my career in compensation teams, and it truly happens daily. Sometimes we think we're the only ones negotiating, but I promise you're not. So it's worth it to ask the question and see what comes of it, right? It can have a really big impact on your long-term wealth.
Yeah, as you're saying, the expectations, right? The things that we expect. I don't think none of us ever expect that some people are paid millions of dollars a month for some of the work that they do. This was a huge eye-opener for me. It really made me realize that we have to be really informed, really do our research, talk to people like you who are experts in this to understand how we need to negotiate and how we can really secure our future as well. Because unfortunately nowadays there's so much uncertainty, there's a lot more divorce, etc., and things can just change so quickly. And all of a sudden, the security that you thought you had isn't there anymore, right? So we have to make sure we secure ourselves. And I think that, you know, your help is so important in that for women. What's the best way for anyone who wants to reach out to you to connect with you?
Yeah, so you can add me on LinkedIn. You can probably see my name on this video, or you can find us at www.thethoughtfulco.net, or email us at contact@thethoughtfulco.net. Always happy just to chat about, you know, a situation you're facing or any questions that you might have. You can probably tell I love to talk about compensation negotiation. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Great questions. I got some questions I've never got asked before, so.
My pleasure. And I'm here sitting thinking that you chose the best possible career path to be empowered and to make sure that you're compensated well. So congratulations for that choice.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a kind of a side benefit of what I did. But I will say my first offer out of business school was going into exec comp consulting, and I did not negotiate it. So I learned after I got it, but I do regret that. So.
Well, that's also a lesson all in itself, right? And
Yeah.
how easy it is to fall into that pattern and not negotiate. So
Definitely.
thanks so much
You
for
can always
sharing
talk
your
yourself.
sharing your wisdom and your key learnings with us today.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me on.